What's up, gamers? Welcome back to another Dark Souls video. This video I think I want to talk about Dark Souls 2, which is the second game in the Dark Souls series. I've just streamed through Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, Bloodborne, and Demon Souls, and the full and complete playthrough of Dark Souls 1 is up on YouTube already, and then I was starting to get to Dark Souls 2 because I had a ton of fun when I was playing it. It was a blast to play Dark Souls 2 again. It was the first Dark Souls I ever played way back when these games were still coming out. I played Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin, so just to put that in perspective, I don't know what it was like on base release. I always played the Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin on PlayStation 4. Take that into perspective, but I remember that was the first one I played. I had an absolute blast playing it, even though I died a ton of times, and I think when we looked back on stream to my old save file, which was still there for some reason on PlayStation 5, I guess it was one of the saves that got carried over. It was like 164 hours just to beat the game once, which is absurd.
Dude, I wonder if it still has my there's no way. If it carried it over from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 5, there's no shot, right? Like, I guess it's PlayStation 4. There's no okay. Oh, there's a continue. Oh yeah, there's my fucking. There's no way. I'm level 195. Oh shit! I put in 163 hours to this guy. Yo, they still have it saved. That is nuts. There's no way. I want to check this out real quick before we start a new one. I want to see what I'm at. Oh my god, I even made it like me. And I thought I had a beard when I was 15. And I have a tattoo for some reason. I don't know why. Wait, yeah, where are my stats? Where are my stats? I got vigor. I only have 17 HP. But I got 40 endurance. 23 vitality. 40 strength. 50 dex. Dude, he's kind of cracked.
And I don't even think I beat all the bosses in the DLC. Like, I just went straight for it. So it was definitely a rough experience, but did it get me into the games? It's definitely the one that got me into the series, and so that's where we're at. But this video is going to be about Dark Souls 2, which is one of my favorite series in the game. Just one of my favorite games in the series. Sorry. The reason I'm doing this video, I guess, is because there's a lot of controversy, which I didn't know about the first time through until I started playing it this time currently. Like, when I started playing it this time, I realized that there's a lot of people who don't like this game, and I guess back in the day it was considered the worst one, and people were very unhappy with it, and I don't know why. I think it does a lot of things better than Dark Souls 1, but it is not Dark Souls 1, and there's definitely a lot lacking from Dark Souls 1, but I don't think by any means it was the worst in the series. So we're just gonna go over some of the things that I found through videos and Reddit posts that people, I guess, didn't like, or certain aspects of the games that were very niche and maybe didn't get recepted as well, but I think they were pretty good. But play the game, make your own decisions, obviously. So yeah, we're gonna get into the video right now, and thank you guys so much again for tuning in. The first thing, we're gonna hop into one of the juicier topics here, which is adaptability. For those of you who don't know, adaptability is an attribute, one of the traits you can level up your character on, and it is not present in Dark Souls 1, and it was not carried over to Dark Souls 3, and I think that's probably because it got such mixed reviews and stuff. From what I could tell on Reddit and like other videos, that it was people didn't like it, I think, coming out of it. But some people say it's an easy slider because basically what it does is it ups agility, and it's pretty vague on what that does. That's one of the main things it does, up agility. It does a couple other things, but the one we want to look at is the agility, which it doesn't necessarily outright tell you what it is, but what it does is it makes your iframes higher. So after a certain level of points, your agility goes up a certain amount, and once you break another tier, you get like more iframes. And what that does is, if you incorrectly time a dodge, maybe you're too early, a bit too late, your iframes will kick in and you will basically dodge through most attacks. So obviously as that goes higher, your dodging can be pretty terrible and you'll still not take any damage. So that's why some people call it an easy slider, because obviously the more points you get, you can dodge and not take any damage, and now the game's pretty easy, which is fair. I mean, that's definitely, since dodging is such a prevalent thing in these games, it does make the game a bit easier. But I mean, I had no problems on this last playthrough. I played through at like 3 or 4 adaptability, which is very low. And yeah, you get caught. The hitboxes in this game are awful, but I mean, you get caught every once in a while, but I didn't think it was too terrible not to put points into it.
Oh, I'm all over his face right now.
Oh, I'm not even near the sword. What are we talking about? I think what this was meant to do was make the disparity between strength builds and dex builds much greater, because in Dark Souls 1, you just had endurance, which upped your endurance, your ability to dodge and attack over and over again, and it upgraded your equip load, which is how much heavy armor and weapons you can carry. And I think that made in Dark Souls 1, whether you're doing a strength build or a dex build, pretty much the same, because if you were a strength build and you wanted to carry more weight, then you would put stuff into endurance. And if you were dex build and you needed to dodge more and attack more because your weapons are lighter, then you would put it into endurance, and then it didn't really matter. I feel like you just kind of had the same similar stats, and then the only difference was what weapon you carry, kind of a thing. So I think that they were trying to make 2 different real melee playstyles by having Vitality change from just being HP in Dark Souls 1, Vitality was just HP, and then in Dark Souls 2, Vitality changed and it only does equip load. So now you have 2 new stats basically that I think mirror 2 different styles of play. I think if you wanted to be a lighter, faster character that dodges all the time, and that's its main way of getting out of damage, then you would up adaptability along with dexterity. And then if you were a strength build, you would focus more on putting those extra points into vitality so that you could wear heavier armor and carry more greater shields, greater weapons, so that your poise goes up and you end up just tanking damage or using a shield to negate most of the damage, and that's kind of how you beat bosses. So I think they were trying to make 2 different ways to beat bosses and beat the game, and so they made 2 different stats for that. So I think honestly adaptability and vitality, the change to vitality, it makes sense if you think about it that way, that they were trying to make 2 playstyles. Unfortunately, Dark Souls 1 had I think there's such a stigma that came out of Dark Souls 1 with shields and tanking and poising through things, that like dodging was the more skillful way to play the game, so then everybody started dodging and finding out ways to get their character to not only be tanky but dodge too. So I think that played a big part in why people say that, oh, everyone's going to put into it because everyone dodges, and I feel like they were trying to get players to play differently. I think they were trying to get people to just be like, hey, you don't have to dodge, like you can just tank this stuff too. But yeah, that's what I think on adaptability. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it was just them trying to really differentiate 2 styles of melee play. I mean, I think you could almost put like adaptabilities for dexterity, vitality is for strength, and then attunement is for being a mage. I think there's one trait for every playstyle that's just kind of like you have to put points in. But Dark Souls just, again, has such a big pressure, I think, from the community to learn how to dodge and roll, and then, so obviously if there's a trait now that lets you do that easier, even if you're good or bad at dodging, then yeah, it's an easy slider. But I think it was just trying to make different playstyles. So with that in mind, I'm for it. I wish it was actually in different games. I would rather have that in Dark Souls 3, because Dark Souls 3 is way faster, and like if you're playing a lighter character that can't tank, then you're gonna have to dodge a lot, and having an attribute to do that in Dark Souls 3 would, I think, have made the game way more interesting. But that's just me. I'm for adaptability. I know a lot of people aren't, but yeah, that's all I got on that one. We're gonna move on to the next topic. One thing that does seem to still be hated is soul memory. It's, instead of using your soul level, which is when you level up, right, every time your soul level goes up with each level you put into it, but they made a thing called soul memory, which kind of puts you in these tiers based on the total number of souls that you have. And people didn't like this because, as far as I could tell, it seems like the only reason that you wouldn't like this is if you were trying to co-op and you started later, and so you can't really summon into someone else's world, or if someone else is worse and they have to farm a bit more to get to the same area you are, now they're out of your tier. So it can kind of be a little wonky with co-op. I think for people who are trying to play the game like not together at the same time, and then they're trying to just hop into each other's games at random moments, that's difficult, because if somebody is here and they're willing to wait for their friend to get to that point in the game, but that friend's maybe a little worse, or you were a little worse, then you had to farm more, and even though you're the same soul level and you're at the same place, it took you a ton more souls, and now you're like out of range to be summoned. I could see how that could be super annoying. But the other option is it evens out invasions as well. So basically the enemy players that come to the game have to be within a certain soul memory range, so it doesn't matter about level anymore. And I honestly, I don't see why that's terrible, because there's definitely a lot of people in Dark Souls 1, even when I played it recently, and in Dark Souls 3, where you're like level 10 playing it for the first time, and then someone's also quote-unquote level 10, but they're using items that are like end game items because they're good enough to beat the game, and then they just come and troll you at the start and you can't really do anything about it. And so this does seem like a decent way to stop this, because yeah, like if you're super good at the game and you go and beat all the bosses and get really far without leveling up, great. Like, and then if you want to come terrorize new people, you can't really do that. It seems that there's not really a work around for that, but I know that there is a ring that does allow you to not gather souls to stop your soul memory. But I don't know at what point you can get that. So you're probably still pretty far along in the game when that happens. So people don't like it. I don't really know why. It just seems like if you liked to do that in Dark Souls, to go troll newer, younger players or do whatever that is, now you can't. So that just seems like a big womp womp situation there. Like, sorry. But I do see how for co-op, if it can be a little jank. But other than that, I mean, I don't see a problem with it. Again, I think it's just them solving a problem, and the people hated it enough to get them to stop. So I guess if there's one thing we know from adaptability and soul memory is that you can bully the shit out of FromSoft and they'll change their game. Which, I mean, hey, if your community doesn't like something, I'm all for games changing, but this one seemed like a decent counter to the just trolls running around. Yeah, that's all I got for soul memory. That's as far as I know about it. I don't know if there's anything more to it, but if there is, let me know. But we're gonna move on to the next thing. So the next one we're going to is like the enemies, and basically that there's too many and they aggro for too long, and they definitely do aggro for far too long. I won't fight that one at all. If you try to run from Dark Souls 2 enemies, they will chase you to the ends of the earth. I think for the first thing, too many enemies, I think this game is definitely more cooperative focused, or it was supposed to be. For Dark Souls 1, I think there's only, for several bosses, you can definitely summon in people to help you, which is, you know, you can do that in any Dark Souls game. They have NPCs running around, but I think the number of NPC summons for Dark Souls 2 seems much higher, and they even give you summons at the start of levels, like at No Man's Wharf. Like, you can summon in somebody right off the first docks and then go through the level, and then there's another summon. If you talk to Lucatiel, you can summon her in, and you can go in with 3 people into that boss fight. There's also the Sentinels in Lost Bastille that you can bring 3 people into. And I feel like in Dark Souls 1 and in Dark Souls 3, like, you don't really ever have that many summons at doors. There's not that many NPC summons, so I think this game was just like they were trying to distinguish the play types that I talked about before. I think they were also trying to switch it to more of a cooperative focus. So they made the levels harder to do on their own, but they gave people options to summon. So yes, the boss runs and enemies are tough to get through on your own, and I think that was on purpose, right? And in terms of aggro range, I would say that definitely one of the ones that's like, was it Brightstone Seldora that has one of the most like hated runs, where there's all the people shooting homing soul spears at you, or there's the little guys in the water jumping out at you to stun lock you for a second, so then you can get hit by a bunch of magic. And if you try to run through that, you're definitely going to die a couple times. It's pretty rough. I remember doing that. Like, it's burned into my memory doing that like 8 years ago when I first did it. So it's definitely a tough place to get through, but I think they just wanted you to use a bow. But I know that there's, again, like a stigma around this game where it's like, no, you got to play on your own, you got to dodge through everything, and you got to get good and destroy everybody. And I think in this game, maybe why it wasn't so taken so well is because you can summon, and I think they wanted you to summon, and they made it harder for you if you don't summon, so people didn't like it because now there's too many enemies because it was meant for more people. And the aggro range is further because they wanted you to play different ways in different areas, but using a bow, again, I feel like for a lot of Dark Souls people, especially coming off Dark Souls 1, it's like, don't use a bow, come on, go in there and fight. So a lot of times if you just aggro one with your bow, like, you won't have to fight 10 people in a small area with magic around you. I think if you just play smarter, then you can get through the game solo just fine. I think if you just don't, if you're patient and don't try to run through to the boss, I think they were just trying to get you to play different ways again, and again, got a bunch of backlash for it, so it did not carry over to Dark Souls 3. I think there's far less summons in 1 and 3, so but yeah, that's what I gotta say about that. I honestly, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it just, again, makes different ways of playing. I will move on to the next one. So another big one that I saw was level design, right? It's not Dark Souls 1, which is always a big complaint about Dark Souls 2, but the level design is definitely lacking from Dark Souls 1. I mean, the planning out of Dark Souls 1 level design is definitely very intricate and well thought out, because before you get the Lord Vessel in Dark Souls 1, you aren't able to warp to any bonfires. And then once you get that, you're allowed to warp to the bonfires you've been to, which is great. But before that, obviously, they had to figure out a way to get you back to the main bonfire quickly, but then still out into the world and go to different areas also quickly. So they had a very intricate way of doing shortcuts and planning and loop arounds that get you all back to Firelink Shrine. And then depending on which way you go, you can loop back to wherever you were pretty quickly. They did a great job on it, and it's one of the things that everybody likes about that game. And then obviously Dark Souls 2 came out, and they said, well, we'll let you warp to bonfires. It makes things a lot easier. You just pop back and forth, and it's fine. So they just carried that over to Dark Souls 2 from the start. So right when you start the game, you can warp from Majula to a new place, the first bonfire you get, and from there on, you can just warp back and forth. And again, a different game. It's not Dark Souls 1, so womp womp. So yeah, like there are some drawbacks to it, but I think overall warping from the start, I think is a great quality of life change. I'm sure it's not as intricate, but like I personally don't need that. I don't mind not running past basic hollows over and over again. Yeah, so that's what I got for like level design and stuff like that. I think it's pretty good. I don't think they did anything terrible. Like, it's just not connected. It's a preference thing. Like, if you liked the complexity of the level design in Dark Souls 1, then you're gonna like that. But if you don't and you just prefer warping around like I do, then this is preferred. So those were the things that I looked at through Reddit and different videos that I found when I discovered this game wasn't very popular in terms of the series, and after I played it, I liked it a lot. But just has some closing things here. The weird thing is, I kind of get it though too, that it's not as interesting given the bosses are all kind of the same and stuff, because even when I was making like the Dark Souls 1 videos, which I just finished, it was fun to make those. Like, there was a lot of great moments in there, and then when I went to the Dark Souls 2 one, I definitely got the feeling, like, I only got this after. When I was playing it, I was in it, and I was like, yeah, like, this makes a lot of sense. Like, this is actually really fun. I don't get why people don't like this. But then definitely going back and, like, looking at the footage, I just definitely didn't get the feeling that it was as interesting, I guess, to, like, watch, in a sense. There's definitely some people that say it's more turn-based because you kind of just have to wait your turn, and then attack, and then dodge, wait your turn, and it's not very fluid. And I definitely got that, like, watching it back, but like I was so into like doing that turn-based stuff while I'm playing it that I didn't really notice. But then like watching it back, I was like, oh, these are kind of like, the bosses kind of take a while. I'm not really ever attacking, and like the punishment is really hard. Like, it's very harsh if you like mess up, so you kind of have to play patiently and wait for that opening, which, you know, granted, that's how some bosses work in all the Dark Souls games, but like this one definitely felt like, just going it back, so like that's kind of almost why I made this video more as like a summary video, talk over some points, because I didn't feel like making videos like part by part as I did for Dark Souls 1 would be as entertaining or interesting, because I was going through it and like there weren't as many great moments. Most of the great moments were actually interacting with the enemies near me and like messing up that stuff, but like boss fights and stuff, like they just weren't as cool, except for like a couple, like the slumbering dragon from the sunken city. Like, that was a great fight. Like, I had my katana break, it was super interesting, beat it first try somehow. And you know, there were a couple good fights definitely in the DLCs that were good, but like the main game, I just didn't think it was even worth it to make it into a series, because I just was going through the footage and I was like, it's kind of not, you know, it just wasn't doing it. And so I definitely get the allegations that it's just not as interesting, but like that's why this video got made, because I definitely think it was a fun experience, and I wanted to go over like my summary of the game and all that stuff. I get it a little bit on why it's not as intense of a Souls game in terms of 1 and 3, but I still love it. I still think it's not the worst game by any means, especially in terms of Souls games. Just fun fact, I thought Bloodborne was far worse, and I know that that's a heinous crime to say in some circles, but so in my opinion, Dark Souls 2 is definitely not the worst in the Souls series. In terms of the other games that FromSoft has made, I would actually rank it below Dark Souls 3. I think I would do 3, 2, 1 in the order of personally like my ranking of the Dark Souls series. But that's what my thoughts are on Dark Souls 2. I appreciate everybody watching. Obviously, this is controversial stuff. I think if you guys have other points to make, feel free to do that in the comments. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys all in the next one. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.